Right. So, people, how do we see the world? Now, there's some things I wanted to just highlight and um, just present once again. And I love speaking about this. And it's nested in the conversation on consciousness, because consciousness is something that we have no idea what it means to be aware of something. Like right. So we have some, right. So we have experiential, um, we have an experience that we can bring. So I know what it means to be aware. You know what it means to be aware, to be conscious. But there's no way of being able to somehow even map what that feels like. There's no actual, because consciousness is just so, the whole thing is evasive, and everything, consciousness, by the way, because our conscious thought is nested in unconscious thought. Most of thought is unconscious. Now, this was something that, many years ago, scientists weren't actually that familiar with. They thought maybe some thought was conscious, but most of thought is actually unconscious. So it's subconscious, it's below our conscious kind of. So imagine conscious, our kind of, our being conscious. And I don't mean by that just so like we're as in not being fainted, as if somebody has fainted and somebody is conscious. I don't mean in that sense. Consciousness is linked into many things. So it's linked into like memory, it's linked into attention, awareness, a unity of consciousness, that a sense of self. All of these things, amongst other things, there's like a neural binding in the brain that's kind of collectively presenting these things in consciousness. And then most of what's happening is underwater. And it's only the tip of the iceberg that is our conscious thought. But our conscious thought is emerging from our subconscious or unconscious thought. So what the hell is going on here? And it's crazy. So when you think about these things, and just to give you an idea, because the discourse at hand that I want to speak about is truth. Because what is truth? That's the kind of discourse. Because and these are just kind of things feeding into that. So imagination. So something we now know is that imagination, from the mind brain perspective, the brain perspective as well, is now we actually know is in many ways indistinguishable from physicality or physical realities. So let me give you an example. I see this right now. So there's certain parts in my brain, in the visual cortex, that are lighting up. So we've got these neural correlates that are lighting up. So let's say I can see an image there, or I can see this book over here. There's certain parts that are lighting up in my brain. Now, let's say I wasn't looking at a book, or I wasn't, and I start imagining that book, whether I daydream it, or whether I close my eyes and see it, or whether I just imagine it. The same parts that would light up when I see it will still light up. And let me add to that. If I imagine myself walking, the same parts of my brain that would go active when I'm walking will go active. But the only difference is my brain will be inhibiting certain sensory motor cortex responses. So it's kind of blocking. So it's like the same thing. It's like the accelerator is pressed, it is in gear, but you have also pressed the brake. It's not that there's no gear and there's no acceleration. There is. So that's what the brain is doing. So in many ways, imagination is quite indistinguishable from what we're calling real, as far as the brain is concerned. Okay, so we have to. So let's just let that settle as a thought. Now, the other thing is qualia. Okay, qualia is like the kind of qualities of things that are subjectively experienced. Like, let's say, taste, smell, color, sound. Now, we can scientifically, through neuroimaging and stuff, we can see neural correlates. So let's say when a person sees something, a certain part of the brain fires up. So we can have a kind of map of this is happening. But what does it feel like to experience the color red? What does it feel like to eat an apple? There is no way to even begin at this stage in explaining that. That's honestly quite phenomenal when you think about it. So this is all feeding into, I wanted to share something that in light of that, there was a study. Now, some people had some follow-up questions to it. Nevertheless, I thought it's interesting to share. Right. So now this, as you can see, there was there was a researcher, Davidoff, who'd conducted some research with a tribe, um, the, the Himba tribe in Namibia. Now, this was on color. Now, what they were researching was people who, right, what they were researching was people who don't have certain words for a color. Now, sorry, let me get that. Right, let me just pause that for a moment. A lot of research into color has argued that there's certain colors that develop in a certain order, and they seem to be pretty much universal throughout the world. So let's say if there's a culture that has no words for color, it will definitely have a color, the words for black and white, because as a binary, day and night and darkness and light, and it will still have black and white, and it may list all the other colors into them. If they have a third color, that third color will always be red. So if, let's say, cultures and subcultures where they are restricted for words to describe colors, if they have none and they just have the very, like, just none whatsoever, they will still have black and white. And if they had a third only, that third will almost always be red. And if they had a fourth, it would be yellow, and then green, and then blue. So this is almost universal. There's some exceptions, but this is how they see this evolving in cultures. Certain kind of studies, anthropological studies on that. So, okay, now, so some researchers had kind of explored that what if you didn't have a word, a name for a color? Like many cultures, they mix certain colors together. So, do you still see the color? Now, this sounds like a bizarre question. Okay, so you think to yourself, well, that doesn't make much sense. But of course, you see it. Now, it's not actually that obvious, you see. So what was done was an experiment was done with the Himba tribe, where they got these people who they have a different coloring system, and they didn't distinguish between certain colors. And one of the colors they didn't distinguish was between green and blue. But they did have a lot more names for different shades of green, which, let's say, in English, we don't generally, or the common, it's not common parlance that people common speak, that people use so many. Maybe nowadays people use, certain, but the common person may not be up to speed with them. So they may just think green. Whereas, let's say if you saw pink, you won't think red. You won't think light red. You'd think pink. But there were certain cultures, like let's say the Arabic culture, if you went back, Arabic language didn't have the color pink. Many colors didn't. This kind of evolved later on. So with this tribe coming back here, they tested them. So in this experiment, what they did was they put, as you can see, all these green squares, and one of them had a slightly different shade. So now for Westerners, that was quite difficult to kind of distinguish. So people had to kind of keep looking, and they had to kind of check, well, which one is it? Now, it's so you can see one. So there's two green things, one with the blue, and then the other one just green. And it is the same where you find the blue square. On the other side, where you find that same green, is apparently a subtly lighter shade. Okay. So, okay, now when they had these people from the Himba tribe take this test, and they asked them that which one of the green is the odd one out, they very quickly could tell, very quickly. And we actually would really struggle because they saw that green as a different color and they could pick it out almost straight away. Now, what's interesting is when they asked them to spot with the blue square, that is, are any of these squares different? If so, can you point out which one is different? It took them significantly longer to spot out the blue square. Unlike us, like we would see that straight away. Now, that is incredibly fascinating because what it shows is that the way the language, I guess in some ways, there's something known as the Sapir-Whorfian hypothesis in psychology, that the language influences the way we see the world. This supports that in a different way about color and perception, that having the word for something or not having it can actually influence how you even see it. So let me show you here. This is the Himba classification of color. So you can see here that Buru, the blue and that green, is exactly the same. And the other two greens are two different, like they're like totally different colors to them. I mean, okay, I can see that they're different shades of green, but to them, these are distinct colors. They're not just shades, they're like distinct. But the blue, the Buru, is just like the other green next to it. It's like the same thing. And I know, I know in certain cultures, I don't, in fact, it's interesting because when I think about it, because blue is one of the most, in several cultures, blue is a recent adage in colors. And thinking about it, I don't know why, but I'm pretty sure that even in the Indo-Pak world, like when I was a kid, unless I'm imagining this now, I'm sure my mother would refer to the kind of peppers that are the green chili as nili march, like which is actually blue, because the nila is actually blue. So that's, and I never used to think so much about it, except it's not. I mean, they call it, like nili march, but I don't know. That's interesting. So I'm sure that also has something to do with that. Maybe there wasn't a distinction, maybe generations back, between blue and green. But it doesn't mean that just because they use that, they don't know, they can't see blue. They can. And even in these tribes, many of the people, they did see it, but there was a delay in being able to see it. So, right. So there was a delay, and there was further experiments that were done with Europeans. So they found Italians, I believe, who had a different name for light blue, if I'm correct, and they have a different color for dark blue, like as different colors. not just as, so I don't just mean like we would say like navy blue, but as different colors altogether, just as you would have as pink and red. So when the experiments were done, and let's say English speaking subjects were asked to spot out the color that is different, there was a delay in comparison to their Italian counterparts who would immediately see it. So what this goes to show, and is that our world, even what we're seeing, is being influenced. Like there's this kind of this dynamic inter-exchange between society and us. The language, which is a social entity, feeding into us, which is then feeding back into society, which is then this kind of loop that is being created, a psychosocial loop that is influencing our reality, making it somewhat distinct to the person next to us. And I'll tell you something about color. This is interesting. There was an experiment done where they had some gelatin kind of product, like a jelly, that was tasteless, odorless. Okay, it was just transparent, just jelly, like gelatin, nothing, no taste to it. And what they did is they dyed it, colored it different colors. So red, yellow, green, and blue. Now, what was interesting is the participants, when they had the red one, they described it like sweet because of the mental link to things like strawberries. When they had the yellow one, they felt that it had somewhat of like a soury, kind of like a lemony kind of taste to it. They felt this. Okay. And the green, I think they likened, the green was second best. They liked that. So they felt that the most sweetest was red, then it was green, then yellow, and then blue is the farthest one. They didn't like that. Most people felt that they didn't like that, the taste of that, even though all of these were tasteless. The blue is interesting, by the way, because blue as a food product is the most loathed because it's close to food. Blue is like when meat has gone off, and we in our evolution have. So I'll tell you what's fascinating. You see, human beings, we have certain things well within our psyche. So one of the colors worldwide that people feel is their favorite color is blue. Like people feel blue is a favorite color. Now, there may be some evolutionary kind of thing about this. And blue actually helps, by the way. It has a psychosomatic effect on putting people to sleep. Whereas red wakes you up. This is why the red pill and the blue pill. Because blue is it's meant to kind of has this effect of kind of putting people to sleep whenever they've done placebo studies. Now, what they did is they asked a bunch of, Heinz, many years back, they asked a bunch of, they were changing the color. So they asked a bunch of kids what their favorite colors were. And they said blue. So they thought, let's put ketchup as blue. Now, that was an absolute catastrophic failure because blue, even though people may like it on clothes or on things, they don't like it in food. It just doesn't work. So it's an absolute failure because it's deeply embedded in us that we just don't like blue food. Maybe some cultures adjust to it and they create certain things that's different, but there seems to be, just as red has this kind of danger appeal to it, that's like universal almost. So, right, okay, so coming back to this experiment where they had these people try out this jelly or this gelatine that was tasteless, and they flavored it, and they said that no, this was sweet, and this was like this, and this one we liked the least, and this we liked the most. At the end of the experiment, they told the people that this was a placebo, that this was tasteless, that there was zero taste in this. This is the same jelly. Here it is without the coloring. It's just see-through. There's nothing in it. the participants they do not believe it. Like, they could hear what they're saying, but they said that, but I actually tasted the sweetness. Now, the question is that, was that true for them? Because in what they experienced, was that true? And if it was true, then what is the building block of reality? Because is it the mind, or is it the objective materials? Because the materials there clearly were not corresponding to this person's experience of what is true. And I think that's such a profound discussion for what is true. And I think these things tie into a greater discourse. I know in the past some people have spoken, and with me as well, about some ex-Muslims, and we've had a discussion on when they've said things like, "Oh, when people say, is scripture true?" And I've always said, "Well, what kind of truth do you mean?" Because there's many truths, and they're all true in their own way. One is empirical truth, like you want to measure something. So empirically speaking, that jelly was not empirically, it did not contain any kind of sweetness or anything that should have activated the sweet senses. So that's from an empirical perspective. Experiential truths, you've got, people will have narratological, people will have metaphorical truths, people will have symbolic truths, people will have even psychosocial truths. The fact that we believe in things, the fact that we believe in laws, we believe in rights, we believe in ambitions, we believe in these are just psychosocial truths. They're not actually empirical. Like, how is that? That's not a. So when we're looking at truth, we have to question that. What does it mean? Because at a very simple level, one could say, well, correspondence theory, that, well, if something corresponds to it, then it is true. But in that case, this person's truth did not correspond, but to them, it was 100% real. Now, you could say, well, it's real in their mind, but it's real. But then it comes, most of the world is actually just in our mind. And even if we have created it intersubjectively, but then it's not a naked, sheer objective truth independent of the human perspective. So it just shows the complexities in this discussion and discourse. That's all. I thought that would be interesting to share that. But okay, let's move on, people. Trudeau going back and forth between the stream and fresh and fit. Lol. Okay, I don't know that. Right. Okay, the T. I don't know what the. It's interesting on that, because conditioning, by the way, can override. So you can get conditioned, which will then override your cultural kind of tendencies. Or sorry, maybe you're somewhat of a I don't know whether it's primordial or just general. So let me give you an example. Drinking Coke. Now, you'd never think human beings would ever want to drink water that looks black. That's like, from an evolutionary perspective, I'm sure we would have hated that. But we've got so conditioned to it that when Coca-Cola in the 90s they made a clear Coke. I've forgotten what they called it now, something clear or something. And Pepsi made one as well. And it was a clear failure. They just absolutely failed. Because people were now too conditioned, and all of a sudden transparent. You see, water gives a tasteless effect. So when people, this is why people don't like buying drinks that are just see-through, because they don't experience the taste as much, because the mind, the eye sees. And I'll tell you what's fascinating. In Arabic, there is a saying that al-ainu ta'kul. It's a proverb that the eye is what eats. So when you go to like a banquet or you go somewhere and people have got all this food, and the Arabic proverb is al-ain ta'kul, that the eye eats. And it's true, because when something is made so tantalizingly appealing, it adds to the flavor. So when Coke and Pepsi did make it all of a sudden see-through, the sales dropped and it flopped. So they had to turn it back to black, which was actually, the color black is counter, or dark brown is counterintuitive for water, for a drink, because it would be mud. And I'm sure, if it wasn't for all the advertising that went into Coke to condition us all worldwide, I can't remember who was saying, they said that, who was it that was saying once that they said they went to a place where they couldn't find water, but they found Coke. Coke bottle. It's like, so this is isn't there that old movie as well where, what is it, The Gods Must Be Crazy or something, where they throw a Coke bottle from the helicopter or something, and it triggers a series of events. But yeah, so we are now conditioned to accept Coke as black. So we're not neutral on that anymore. So like it's very easy to get conditioned, because once you do and the society accepts it, there's an intersubjectivity that kind of endorses it. Cool. Let's move on, people.